Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
When I looked at your show notes, the first thing that stuck out was the saying that was revolutionizing what's possible for women in the music industry.
Yeah.
That's what lights up Lindsey Kirkendall.
Yeah. It
Welcome
definitely
to the
lights
show.
me up. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We're glad to have you. So that's what lights you up.
Yeah.
I think we're still in a world where, and I notice it mostly in country music, and I think to a certain extent maybe Christian music too, where it's tougher for the woman than it is for the male entertainer to be successful. Even though, in spite, when you think about American Idol and the two biggest winners,
Right.
you know,
They were girls.
Yeah, and I don't think any male star from American Idol
They haven't even come close to that level of success. Yeah.
But we're still dealing with a glass ceiling.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Yeah. Why is that?
Oh, gosh, your guess is as good as mine. I do think one thing that has always stuck out to me, and I thought this was really interesting, I was at a Change the Conversation panel back when we could all be together. It was at BMI, so it must have been 2019.
Right.
And they were interviewing a panel of female journalists. It was really interesting because they were saying, and I don't remember all the specific details, but there was just kind of, even for people that were on the journalism side of the industry, there was a little bit of an unspoken code about like what questions you could ask female artists and what questions you could ask male artists. And I remember one of them saying, people will ask Carrie Underwood, how is it like being a mom and also being on the road and juggling both parenthood and touring?
Right.
But no one asked Luke Bryan, how is it being a parent on the road and juggling parenthood and touring?
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's just still some like constructs in our minds around roles, you know, that are still playing into the way we do business in the music industry.
Well, obviously, this has gone back decades when you think about, you know, Patsy Cline back in the days or anybody that was a female artist who had kids. It was almost like, heaven forbid, you're on the road and you're neglecting your children.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're taking your children on the road, then it's like, oh, my gosh, you're not letting your kids have a normal life.
Yeah. Right.
So it's a no-win situation.
No-win situation. But they don't really ask that about men. It's like all the females' decision. And it's like as if, well, the guy, it's okay for him to take off, but it's not okay for the woman to take off, you know?
Yeah.
It's a really double standard.
It is. And I think a lot of that, once again, goes back to, at least in our industry, and I can't talk about any of the other corporate worlds, but in the music business, it has been, at least from an executive standpoint until recent years, it has been a male-heavy leadership role. I mean, most of the label heads, most of the managers, most of the publicists were of the male species instead of the female species. Now, when I worked at one of the record labels, two of my bosses were women, and I actually appreciated working with them more than I did the guys. They were actually easier to get along with.
I've had male clients tell me similar things.
Yeah.
You know, they really enjoy working with a woman versus a man. And it's interesting, too, because I love that you're bringing in, you know, traditionally, this is how it's always looked at the labels. You know, it's always kind of been male dominated. And then if you look at it even from a digital standpoint, and as things started to change with the tech revolution, it still is very male dominated in the sense that the marketing that we get, the tech resources that have popped up for independent artists, especially, the marketing is all very masculine. And so that was something that I was really noticing when I opened my business, because I was like, man, you know, women really want, I shouldn't say 100% of the time, because that's fundamentally not true, but for a lot of women, they want something different out of their music careers than men do.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they both want success, but I think for women, a vast majority of women, even if it's wanting to have a dog, or a fur baby, like there's something often maternal happening in the background. And so and I know that it was true for me. That was a big part of my story, was that how do I do both? How do I do the parent thing and have a family and have a successful, thriving career and not sacrifice one for the other or whatever? And so I think that just for a lot of women, there's that playing in the background, and it's not necessarily in the same way for men. And so again, when I was looking at what was available for women, and particularly independent artists, female independent artists, it was like all this very masculine energy, all this very masculine slanted marketing. And even though the resources were totally usable for both genders, it was not marketed to women.
And it wasn't interchangeable.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, you could use the things, but it still felt very decidedly masculine.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I was really intentional about when I started to identify how I wanted to show up online as a brand and how I wanted to market. Now, I mentioned earlier, I have male clients. I don't market to them because I can't speak their language at the end of the day. I mean, I can absolutely help them from a business and a strategic consulting standpoint.
Right.
But when you're online and when you're marketing and you're doing that whole thing, you really, at least for me and for most online entrepreneurs or other business owners, it's better to know exactly who you're speaking to. And so just in terms of the music industry and my journey, it was a lot easier for me to have that conversation online focused around the female conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to the woman trying to succeed, and I want to talk about your company and what
Sure.
it is that you're accomplishing here in a few minutes, but when it comes to the role of the woman succeeding, I hate to say this, but we're going to have this conversation.
Let's do it.
Because I'm a guy.
Yeah, let's do it.
There was a time, and even recently, where women, in order to be successful, had to sit on the guy's lap, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm trying to keep it,
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
family oriented here.
I know what you mean.
But it was like, well, come here, honey, just sit on my lap. And personally, myself, I always resented that too, because women and men are equal, especially in this business. I think we both have as much to offer as the other.
Absolutely. Yep.
But you don't see that role, except in very, very minute circumstances. You don't see that role reversed.
No.
And that's got to be a tough road for women, because going into a studio or going into a radio station or going into a songwriting session, as a woman, I would assume your defenses have to go up immediately, because it's like, am I going to get hit upon? Am I going to be asked for, favors, quote unquote?
Right, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
that gets in the way of just trying to do the
Conduct business.
Yeah, conduct business,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. I can say
How
that.
do you deal with that?
I mean, I've seen a lot of people. Well, let me back up and say this. You don't know how to deal with it. It's why we end up with people like Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, right.
Because we're not taught to how to deal with it in an effective way. And it was really interesting. And I'm kind of glad you brought this up, because what popped into my head when you were saying that was, I don't know if you recently saw the Britney Spears documentary.
I haven't yet, no. It is on my punch list.
Yeah, it's good. It doesn't go quite into as much detail as I wish it would about a few of the aspects of the situation, but it shows her as about a 10-year-old girl with Ed McMahon after Star Search. And she's standing there with a boy. And Ed McMahon doesn't ask her about her singing. The first thing he asks her is, "Do you got a boyfriend?" To a 10-year-old little girl. And she's like, you can see her trying to compute, but she also had a really strong sense of professionalism even at that young age. So she was able to kind of manage it. But it's so interesting, because I was sitting there with my husband talking about that, and all of my hairs went on end. And I've worked on the corporate side of the music industry. I've worked at labels. I've been around it. I've had my own experiences with stuff. And I was saying to my husband, I was like, what's so interesting is that I remember seeing those clips of her in Star Search when I was in my late teens, maybe early 20s. That did not bother me the way it does now as a woman in my 30s.
Is that because your eyes have opened more?
I think it's partly to do with the fact that, yeah, I'm older. I've lived more life. I've had my own experiences with men in the industry that have been inappropriate. But also it's just, I think there's been a real shift in our, obviously with the Me Too movement and everything, but there's been a shift. Whereas back when she was 10, like that was a totally acceptable thing to say to a little girl on live television by a dirty old man, you know, like
who had something in his coffee cup besides coffee. Yeah.
Right. So I think it was an interesting moment for me to see that and go, wow, like we've come a long way.
Have we come a long way?
I mean, compared to that, it feels like we at least have a little bit.
Yeah.
But at least in terms of our awareness, because I don't think that would be, at least I would hope, but my assumption is that if a producer saw that this day and age, he'd get canceled.
Yeah. Now, I will
it wouldn't have made the cut.
Yeah.
In the final episode or whatever.
And I will say this, and I honestly, look, go ahead and send me letters. I won't respond. I don't like the word woke, but I think we have come to the conclusion, at least a lot of people, as like you said, the Harvey Weinstein situation really opened up everybody's eyes. I think the Me Too movement was very credible and viable and needed to happen a long time ago. And I think Hollywood is not the only exclusive outlet for that. No. I think the music business has been that way, and whether it's Los Angeles or Nashville or New York, it's the entertainment business is just
it's rife with it.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that's happened.
I am too.
Do you think it has stalled a little bit, or do you think do you think it lost any credibility at any moment, or
I certainly hope not.
Yeah,
I certainly hope not. But I don't know. I think COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement and all the things that we've been dealing with this year have certainly
muddied the waters.
Took the center stage.
Yeah.
So I don't know about stalling out. I know that there's a lot of amazing people. I mentioned Change the Conversation earlier. I know there's a lot of amazing women trying to do amazing things for shifting that tide, particularly in the country music industry. But to your question earlier about how it's shifted, I think that part of the reason that women aren't as effective at knowing how to handle that kind of stuff is because our collective was saying on a mass stage or mass scale, this kind of behavior is acceptable and okay. So as a little girl watching that and seeing an Ed McMahon talk to a Britney Spears at 10, I'm about her age, like no one had to tell me, hey, that's okay or not okay. It was clearly made okay because the producers kept it in the cut, right?
Right.
So that kind of stuff has just been such a part of our culture and has been so ingrained in a way that's just, things just get swept under the rug and no one really thinks twice about it. And it was kind of, I don't remember who it was. Was it Joe Biden? Gosh, let's not get political. Someone said it was, but Matt Damon was kind of poo-pooing like he had patted someone on the rear end. And they're like, well, that's his era. Do you remember that conversation?
I do, yeah. And I got to say, as a guy, I'm like going, seriously, that's the only excuse we're going to use?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So I think that there's just kind of a mass acceptance on some level that I'm glad that we're starting to get away from.
Yeah, I am
my
too.
Water bottle.
I really am.
Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break, get a word in for one of our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Lindsey Kirkendall, and we're going to talk about your company and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that.
This is Katie Long, owner of DIY Music PR, and you are listening to the Business Side of Music podcast.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena. And believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. all written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Lindsey Kirkendall is with us. When we started this conversation, it was revolutionizing what's possible for women. Now, we've talked about in the previous segment everything that wasn't good.
Possible.
So let's take things in a new direction. Let's talk about what is it that is lighting you up, that is working these days. Are you finding something? Are you finding things that seems to be finally taking things in a positive direction?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's go down that road.
Where should we start?
Yeah.
I mean, I think primarily the biggest shift that I've seen, and it's kind of been one of the blessings of COVID, is that artists for such a long time were kind of, again, told without being told that live shows, touring, that's your mainstream of revenue.
Right.
Which I always thought was so ridiculous. Write me letters, I won't answer them kind of thing. But I'm like, this is a really risky stream of revenue to put all the eggs in that basket. I mean, the overhead's outrageous. There's so many variables that the artist is out of control of. You know, you break an ankle, your, guitar player's wife has to have a baby. The venue goes up in flames. I mean, it's just to put... I mean, it can work for A-list mainstream artists because their guarantees are so huge,
right?
And they've got a whole team pulling all of it off. But for the average, independent band or artist, it's not a really great strategy if you're thinking in terms of a business.
But at the same time, when you talk about those A-list artists that are getting such a great guarantee, they too have that same overhead. And now you're talking about maybe 5 or 6 tour buses and 20 semis and 100 people that are relying on you. And that's a big problem we had with COVID when everything just shut down. So, and not to get distracted and get off track, but you're right. The whole COVID pandemic was catastrophic. And we've talked about this on the show before.
Yeah.
It was catastrophic for this business because everybody went, what do we do now?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what have you figured out?
So for me, my kind of education with online entrepreneurship in the digital space and the possibilities for artists in particular really happened about 10, 11 years ago when I was working at a music magazine. And I was working at a magazine that had about 4 titles in print and 1 title that was they had gone from print to digital. And the other titles still had digital imprints, but what I was noticing were the possibilities of when you were able to build a large digital audience around a common theme, how you could monetize them. And so I was watching this company, send offers out to each of their email lists. And again, this was when, email was really doing well from a marketing standpoint 10 years ago. Before
it became spam and we just kept hitting the delete button.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I was noticing that. I was also, it was about 2010 and everyone kind of knew the record deal thing was just not what it once was.
Right.
And I was also looking at other friends that were building businesses in various industries that were making, high 6 and 7 figure incomes in less than sometimes 36 months. And it wasn't, this is just a thing that happens with this particular industry, because it was varied industries. It was just that they were applying the principles of online entrepreneurship to their particular business and growing an audience and selling to their audience.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, why aren't artists doing this? It would give them complete financial and creative control. They wouldn't have to rely on labels or even managers, really. And artists were still coming around to the idea that it was something that was really viable, because social media, even in 10 years, has shifted so drastically. My work with artists on and off when I wasn't in a corporate job over the last 10 years has been helping them understand really who they are as a personal brand, because social media platforms aren't music discovery platforms necessarily. People don't get on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook necessarily to find new music. And so when they do happen to come across an artist, they're not getting a sense of their music first. They're getting a sense of who the artist is.
Right.
They're getting a visual experience, or they're reading the artist's words, or they're understanding like what the artist is passionate about, or if they have the same sense of humor, or if they share the same hobbies or whatever.
It actually becomes a more of an intimate experience than it does that one-dimensional, superficial, here's a copy of the CD or the album or whatever.
Yes.
Now listen to the music.
Right.
Now you have the opportunities to discover not only who they are,
yes,
but what they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've worked with so many artists over the years, and I've said, look, if you look at the artists that you are the most excited about, that you are like, I would go to every concert, they are my favorite. Let me say it this way. They typically feel that way about the artist, not just because they create great songs. It's because they've bought into the holistic personal brand of the artist, and they like who that artist is as a person. Yes.
Yeah.
They've connected. And I think the thing that's beautiful about the digital space and what it's allowed artists to do is shift into understanding that they're not selling the product of music, which is what the traditional music industry leads you to believe is like it's a very product-focused business. But artists aren't really selling music. They're selling emotion.
Right.
That's what they're selling.
We've had that conversation on other shows that the music, it is an emotion.
Yeah.
And whether it's a happy song or it's a sad song or a love song or a protest song, it's filling a niche.
A need. Yeah.
A need of, for that particular moment.
Yes.
I need something to help me solidify my thoughts and my emotions.
Absolutely.
And that song or those songs do that.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think artists, it always is astounding to me when I work with an artist when that light bulb finally comes on. Because they're so focused about the music has to be great, the songs have to be great, it has to be a hit, it has to be a hit. And I'm like, actually it doesn't. It just has to be something that fills a need for the audience that needs your particular kind of stuff.
Okay, so can we back up a moment here?
Yeah, let's do
and you're talking, I was a child of the 60s and a teenager of the 70s. And to me, my wife and I have this discussion a lot. Mm-hmm. The music then seemed to be more, it had more substance to it when it came to the stories.
Yeah.
The creativity of it all. Of course, and of course back then we were still, it was still such a relatively new game musically, the rock and the pop world, that it was, all the doors were open.
Yeah.
Do you think we can get back to that? Are there artists out there now that have that depth and that breadth of being able to tell the stories that need to be heard instead of the ooh baby type? I don't know a better way to describe it, but that has something that is that story that fills. When Bonnie Raitt released "I Can't Make You Love Me," which was I think in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And if you were going through a tough time or you had just gone through a breakup, that song, you wore the tape out or you wore the CD.
I wore that tape out even in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I mean, that song is that good.
Do we have those today?
I think we do. I think that the difficulty is that the vast majority of artists still feel like in order for me to have any level of success, I have to either do what the traditional music industry has always traditionally done or recreate some form of that online.
Yeah.
And typically, I'm finding that the vast majority of artists are, and this is signed artists too, although often their teams are running their social media, but the vast majority of artists are trying to replicate a broadcast marketing experience, which they would get if they were on a label, on a social media platform, and it's not connecting because the social media platforms are not designed to deliver a broadcast marketing experience. People don't get on there to be sold to or marketed to. They get on there to have what feels like a one-to-one connection.
Right.
And so artists are still needing to shift that understanding. And if they can come to a place of, they just want me. They want to be able to connect with me. And it's not about, do we have a song that can stand the test of time or not? Because we absolutely do. Of course we do. I think if we have more opportunity to get a song like that, it's now more than ever, because now we have an opportunity where all of the the population of artists can build an audience and have a successful, thriving, profitable career. Whereas in Bonnie Raitt's era, it was 0.5% maybe. I mean, Who knows the exact numbers, but the difficulty I think for the artists right now is just understanding that you can't replicate what the traditional music industry model is doing on social media and in the same career trajectory. Words are hard today. That an independent artist would take. You just can't. It's a completely different model. So I think that the most important thing that independent artists need to understand is online entrepreneurship, not the music business. Am I on the wrong podcast to say that?
No, and you're actually on the best podcast to be saying that, because that is such. Hey, look. Anybody that knows me, I toured for many years with many major acts.
I was telling my sons, I was like, you guys, he was on Ringo Starr's tour.
And I've worked with, major artists and major labels. I've experienced all that. And I am the biggest advocate when it comes to the independent artist, because I think the independent artist can have that success. Now, the word "that" is a broad stroke of the paintbrush.
Yeah, it is.
It is. But that independent artist can have that success if they get their mind in the right place. And what you're saying is stop being an artist for a moment, or maybe I shouldn't say that, but put the artistry end of it on a side burner, let it simmer, and become an entrepreneur. Because guess what? It is a business, and we say that a lot.
And even signed artists on record labels are still entrepreneurs.
Or should be.
But artists don't think of themselves in that way. And you think about all of these music schools. I always like to kind of rag on music schools because I'm like, they're spending all these parents' money to get their kids this music degree, and they come out and they don't know anything about business.
Right.
And I'm like, you probably would have done better to just like take lessons with your voice teacher back home or whatever and gotten a business degree.
Or got out on the road as a working stiff. In production or a roadie.
And getting some hands-on experience.
I had a friend who went to UCLA Music Business School, graduated, had all this debt, and came to work for me. And I was like, great, you're going to be a production runner. You're going to go out and you're going to get bottles of water and towels from the laundry and, set up the dressing rooms. Well, that's not what I went to school for. Well, until you know how that all works.
Right.
Your book knowledge means nothing to me.
Well, and the last corporate gig my husband worked in was one of the major management companies here in town, and their staff was straight out of Belmont grads, and he was sitting in a meeting with them trying to figure out how to, grow the audience and monetize better the audience of one of their B roster acts. And my husband recommended Patreon, and these 22-year-olds didn't even know what that was.
Oh, wow.
And so they could have probably quoted copyright law, but they didn't know what Patreon was, and they're working inside the industry. And artists are still thinking, well, let's go this route. I want a manager. And I'm like, you don't need a manager.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to just have a business.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for another one of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to talk to this lady that's on fire as far as I'm concerned, Lindsey Kirkendall.
I'll take it.
This is Claire Ratliff from Laughing Penguin Publicity, and you're listening to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Are you curious about Gordon Lightfoot's songwriting process, or what it was like working with Prince in the 80s? Have you ever given any thought to what goes into a golf course design or writing a book? I'm Steve Waxman, the host of The Creationist, a podcast about people who create. Each episode features a different creator sharing stories that I hope will inspire your own creativity. The Creationist is available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, Lindsey Kirkendall is with us. Okay, let's get to the subject at hand, your company. And becoming an entrepreneur as an artist, they really, I said, let's put it on the side burner on the previous segment, but they really go hand in hand. You can be an artist, but you need to be an entrepreneur because, once again, it is the business side of music. That's what we talk about or try to on this show. What is it that you can do to hopefully get them pointed in that right direction?
Yeah, it starts with helping them understand what their intrinsic value is as a person, not even as an artist. And it's always amazing to me and really humbling, and like has brought me to near tears so many times working with artists, because they've never been given the permission to really understand or think about what value they bring to the table for their audience. They can tell you their genre, they can tell you who they sound like, they can tell you what they think their demographic is all day long, but they couldn't tell you, for example, want people to experience healing and comfort when they're listening to their music, or fun, or inspiration, or feeling accepted or seen, or like they have a friend in the fight. I mean, I have done this process with artists. I do it with every artist that I ever work with, as we get down to like, what's your story? Who are you in the world? If you lost your voice and your hands fell off tomorrow, like you would still have value to bring to the world. And right now, the tool that you're using is music to communicate that value. But your music is inspired by who you are, what your story is, why you're passionate about being alive in the world,
Right.
And so when we can really drill down to that, then it's always amazing to me, again, like artists are these creative beings, and business is just as much an art as is artistry. And once they get a sense of their connection to their value and who they are as people and what they're here to do in the world with the tool of music, they start having all these amazing marketing ideas. They start thinking of non-traditional revenue streams. Like, it's amazing when they just can like take off the box that they've kind of put themselves in that looks like, well, if I'm going to have a career as an artist, it needs to go in this particular direction, which is traditionally what we've seen, how the traditional music industry model works.
But guess what? COVID came along.
And then COVID came along.
Got in the way of things.
Yeah.
And now it's a whole new playing field.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. I mean, it is and it isn't, I guess.
Well, we're not touring.
We're not touring, but
And we really stopped selling CDs, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was, for somebody, whether it was the label or that A-list artist, that was another major revenue stream.
Mm-hmm.
Those are gone.
Right. And so what we're
now
doing...
we've kicked out two legs of a three-legged stool, I guess.
Well, I would say, the physical sales of music obviously is almost non-existent. But that was typically something, especially if you're looking over the last 10 years, that was something that existed on a merch table anyway. Merch didn't go away.
What the value of it is, it should.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And merch hasn't gone away. In fact, merch is really, in my opinion, something that artists should look at first. It's funny because you look at people like Beyonce or Justin Timberlake or Jessica Simpson, like all these A-list artists that have eventually, once they reached a critical mass in their mainstream appeal, they started branching off and opening shoe lines and clothing lines and whiskey or whatever.
Yeah.
Artists have the ability to diversify immediately in this day and age. They absolutely can start, and e-commerce is a huge piece of what I'm starting to work into, because traditionally I work with artists one-on-one. We do the whole thing like helping them understand their value. And then from there, the business structure kind of forms around the artist. So yes, touring can be a part of it, but that's not your primary revenue stream. And it shouldn't be even pre-COVID, in my opinion, because most independent artists, it's just not a financially viable option for them long-term. Or especially with women, it might not be something that they want to do often. Maybe they just want to be able to do shows here and there because they've got kids at home or whatever. And so we were looking at, okay, what are the non-traditional revenue streams that if we can grow an audience that loves you for you, because not just the songs that you create and the music that you put out into the world, but because you are a creative, empathetic, like whatever those pieces of you are, we highlight that in the brand. We highlight that in the ongoing narrative of social media, and we start to strategically put their message in front of where those other people that need that, we put that message in front of them where they're hanging out online, and we start to grow the artist audience from that place. And there's we could sit here and go into all kinds of different ways that we can do that strategically, but the e-commerce piece is particularly exciting to me because if you know what you're doing in the e-commerce world, it's not hard to build a 7-figure business in about a year. And that's just real. Like if you know what you're doing, you can scale that bad boy up really, really quick. One of the things I'm actually working on with an artist right now is looking at the other pieces of who she is as a personal brand. So for example, she is a big gamer. And a lot of her audience is into gaming. And that's how she connects, like on Discord, with a lot of her fans, is they game together. And is that what you say? I don't know. I'm showing my age here. They game together.
Yeah, let's ask me. Sure.
But
Quick, I'm going to make a phone call one of my kids.
Right, exactly. She's into Dungeons and Dragons and collecting D&D dice. And so we're working on creating D&D dice that is branded to her. And we're leading with that. But in the commercial, if you will, and in the advertising, we're also putting her music in it. We're putting her as the face of, hey, so for other people who, because social media is Big Brother and they know every move we make,
right?
We can put her advertisements in front of other people who would likely be interested in collecting D&D dice. And now they get to be in front of this particular artist's piece. They get to make a purchase with her, so she's making money immediately, but they're also getting indoctrinated into her brand and getting a chance to listen to her music. So it's killing two birds with one stone.
And it is kind of scary from the perspective of my wife and I will have a conversation and we'll talk about something. And 15 minutes later, these little pop-ups show up on Facebook or on the
cookies.
Yeah. And we're like, how in the heck do they know this?
Yeah.
And then they don't go away. So it is a great opportunity if you're an artist to not only be selling music, but that digital merch table, I guess, is what that e-commerce. Yep. And that's how we have to look at it. Okay, it's not just CDs and T-shirts and photos. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But if you know your audience and you know what your brand is, or create that brand, now you have almost unlimited resources of what you can sell.
I have another artist who always joked that her gardening posts got more engagement than her music posts did. And so we thought, okay, why don't we partner with an Etsy store that's creating really high-end gardening tools and inscript some with a lyric from one of your songs?
Why not?
It's just, and that kind of stuff lights artists up to no end, because I don't know many artists that are really excited about creating another pair of, a bag or a shirt just with their logo on it. It's kind of been done before. But if you can create your own unique merch and get in front of another audience that you would not have otherwise gotten in front of because you're selling to people that like gardening tools that would probably also love your music, they just aren't going to connect because people are I think of even myself, and it's also because I'm in my 30s, but, I'm not out there necessarily always looking for new music. I'm not in that music discovery phase of life anymore. I'm still listening to the stuff that I loved when I was in high school. I'm like, wow, I'm getting old. I'm technically, that in that place where I'm just like, I like the stuff that was out in the 2000s and the 90s and stuff.
But if you do come across something good, my wife and I were watching a show a few months back. I don't remember which one it was. And this song came on and I said, oh my gosh. And so I rewound the show and hit Shazam and found out who the artist was. And all of a sudden I did a deep dive
into the artist.
And I was like, oh, this is like my new best friend musically.
Yeah.
So once again, there's another opportunity. Now, not everybody can get a song on a hit TV show.
Right.
But you're right. It's another way to exploit or be able to expand your audience. And maybe exploit's not the right word, but expand your audience.
That's what the traditional music industry did.
Yes. I'm showing my age. But if you can create new opportunities to get your music out there and maybe selling other things in the process.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Artists are constantly in that catch-22 of I either don't have enough money to go full time with my music, or I have to work the day job to make the money, and then I don't have enough time for the music.
Right.
So if you can create, and that's the beauty of the digital space, if you can create these types of opportunities, if you can grow an audience and create things for them that they want to participate in. I've got a client right now, for example, that after working through who she is and what she's really here to do, she discovered that she really is passionate about teaching students how to really be successful as an artist and have a life where you can move to Nashville and make it work. And so she's booking, rather than booking touring gigs, she's booking live master classes at schools. And then what she's doing is she's inviting them to join her text community. And for those that want more, she's got a mentor program where she's just mentors young women and men, but I think primarily it's girls right now. And it's it costs her a couple hours, maybe a week or month to do this work. And so she's making real cash with very little time, and she has no other day job.
Yeah.
And so that's just one thing. But obviously that was her particular unique business because of that, what was birthed out of discovering what she was really here to do in the world. That was just beyond music. But e-commerce and all these other things, like you said, like there's so much opportunity for artists to be able to start monetizing immediately so they can really have a full-time career as an artist and have a life that they love instead of riding the fence between the two worlds.
It really comes back to discovering what that entrepreneurship is and how to go about getting it.
Right.
And that's where you come in.
Yes. I help them bridge that gap for sure.
How can people find you?
The easiest way is to find me on Instagram. I hang out there quite often. So it's Lindsey Kirkendall. I know, I'm here today.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people. So hi, guys. But yes, I'm easily found on Instagram at Lindsey Kirkendall. You can find me at lindseyKirkendall.com. But those are the easiest ways to get in touch with me.
And you'll be able to find her on the Business Side of Music podcast.
That's true, too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.